My first gay experience. Two life-changing events happened when I walked into a particular house and made as little noise as possible to keep everything a surprise. I ended my relationship 3 years ago and found a man deeply troubled by his family. All my life-changing plans of settling in India poofed into thin air at the first sight that greeted me. When I saw Pia sleeping naked next to a man, the first words that came to mind were that of my mother. 3 years ago, when I had begun this relationship with Pia, she warned me about long-distance relationships. In her opinion, it was a relationship based on chance. A choice where either you or your partner decide if they want to stay loyal to a partner sitting hundreds and thousands of miles away. Although some people succeeded in keeping their loyalty intact, others failed miserably. She was always worried I would fall into the latter category. She worried for the sake of the nice Indian girl because Pia always sounded so loyal to her. Yet 3 years later, here we were, Pia on the bed with a stranger, and I standing at the door like an intruder. The man next to her stirred and gave a little scream when he saw me looming over them. "What the fuck? Who are you?" the man shouted, and looked for his clothes. Pia woke up to find me in near tears. When she tried to speak, I told her to keep her excuses to herself. I broke off with a sob, threatening to spill over. "All I wanted was to give you a surprise, and you..." She tried to speak, but the guy next to her cut her off. "How did you get in, man?" he asked, and came close to look better in my eyes. He was a lot shorter than me, so if it weren't for the seriousness of the situation, I would have laughed. But it wasn't so, and I was ready to bruise his left eye if it ever came to that. "Get out, or I will call the police," he warned. Pia screamed when I tried to leave the place and held my wrist. "I'm so sorry, Daniel, but this isn't what it looks like." Pia, what's going on?" "You need to shut up, Rehan," Pia hissed at him and turned to me. "It's really nothing, and I can explain, Daniel. God, please don't be angry at me." "You have a boyfriend?" the guy Rion asked. By now he was fully dressed and looked as confused as a lamb. It infuriated me. He was sleeping with my girlfriend. How was it that he looked confused? "You have an actual boyfriend? Like someone other than me? Damn." His tone did not sit well with me. "You find this funny, boy?" I growled. No, he shook his head and moved back when I stalked closer. She never gave any hints that she has a boyfriend. Silly as I was, I should have thought before dating her. Was this funny to him? I really couldn't tell. "So she has lied to the both of us?" I asked. Rion shrugged. "Considering I had zero idea about you and your relationship, I would say yes." He looked at Pia, a little upset now. "This is not right, Pia. Even if it's only been 5 months, you should have been honest." "This has nothing to do with you, Rehan. Can you leave?" Pia asked. "I will." He raised his hands in surrender and turned to me. "For clarification, I never knew about you guys, so I'm really sorry for that part I played in ruining your relationship." He walked out and left me to deal with the mess that Pia made. 15 minutes later, when I walked out of the building, my luggage still in my arms, I found Rion leaning against the wall, a cigarette in his mouth. He dropped it when he saw me and stomped over before following me out of the place. I tried to ignore his presence at first, but then I couldn't control my annoyance. It was 2 in the morning and I had just ended my 3-year-long relationship with a woman I had intended to spend my entire life with. And this man wouldn't stop following me. I dropped my bags by my side and turned to him. Even though I loomed over him, he did not seem to fear it. Clearly, he believed that I was over with whatever happened just 10 minutes ago. How dumb could people be? Perhaps this man was never cheated on. I didn't know. "What the hell do you want?" I asked, ready to wrangle his neck in my hands if he spoke the wrong words. "I just wanted to apologize," he answered. "Did you stay this long here to apologize to me?" He shrugged. "That, and I wanted to make sure you do not hurt Pia." "I wasn't going to," I answered, gravely offended by his remark. He raised his hands. "Just needed to make sure." He looked at my luggage. "Need a place to stay? I know the best hotels around here." "Stay away from me, man." I grabbed my luggage and decided to walk out of there. "Let me help you find a good place. It's late and unsafe. Even with your bulk and height, someone may overpower you." He pointed straight ahead. 10 minutes in that direction is a nice hotel. They take bookings on the spot. $34K for a nice room. It's a day's price. Can increase if you want better rooms. Don't worry, I don't work there. I just happen to know the best ones here. Then he grinned at me. There was something bizarre about our interaction. I could not understand this man. Shouldn't he be hurt or at least upset about what happened some time ago? Even though talking to him was the last thing I wanted to do, I couldn't help but point out to him. He first called an auto and then told me about it all over again. Pia and he had only recently started dating, and they had slept together only once during this time. It was when I caught them. Rehan had his own reasons to do so, reasons that he said he could not share, but he promised that he had no idea about me. Pia had lied to us. Rehan claimed that he wasn't really hurt because he was never emotionally involved with her. He was offended, though. When I lay down on the bed of my new room I had booked, I couldn't help but think about the night. I decided to sleep through the pain and think about everything else tomorrow. It did not even take a day for everything to fall apart. The words had spread through the family as my mom suggested I return immediately to heal in peace. I sat down to take into account the racist attitude of some of the other family members. It baffled me to think that so many of them thought that way. I was not ready to deal with their racism and hypocrisy and decided not to move out of the country. Pia's cheating wasn't as much of a problem as her race was to them. If it were not for her being unfaithful, I really would have married her, only to get back at them. But that wasn't the case. As much as I did not want to stay in this cursed city anymore, I did not want to return to entertain such nasty thoughts either. The easiest solution seemed to spend my entire holiday roaming aimlessly across the areas around Goa that I already knew, inch by inch. So I did just that. I grabbed my camera and left the hotel to find peace in the crowd of Goa. It was in the evening that I saw him again. To seem unassuming, I sat down on one of the roadside benches and watched him interact with a couple of foreigners, like me. I knew immediately he worked as a tour guide. If not full-time, then at least part-time. The interaction lasted a good 15 minutes before a tourist bus arrived at the bus stop, and the foreigners left. Rehan waved them goodbye, looked around in the area and found my eyes on him. He did not look away, however, even though it shamed me. He waved to me and crossed the door. I huffed and got up from the bench. It was time to leave for the hotel. "Hey," he said. "I wasn't looking at you in case you got the wrong idea," I told him. "No? Okay, I just wanted to say hi." I stopped in my tracks. "Do you not understand the sensitivity of the issue?" "You're still on that?" he asked. "We had been dating for 3 years. Of course I am," I hissed. He raised his hands in surrender. "I get that nothing that I do will ever make you forgive me," he began carefully and honestly. "I get that you're annoyed seeing me. I just wanted to make sure you're all right. That's all. But now I will leave." He took a few steps back. For your information, we did not go all through it. We tried, but then I couldn't do anything. So then we fell asleep. Then you found us like that. But you know, that does not make it any better. I took a deep breath. "Just go." "Okay," he said, and stepped further away. "If you ever need me or something, ask around for Rehan. They all know me. Or at least my dad. He's one of the hotel managers around here. Bye now." Then he left. I watched his retreating figure, plugged in my AirPods, and found my way back to the hotel. I did not have to ask for him. He was everywhere. 2 days after that strange encounter between us, I found him everywhere. Last time I had to come to Goa was almost 7 months ago, and I hadn't really heard of him, admittedly. That was probably because my entire attention was focused on Pia and our relationship, but it was no longer such, and I could see him everywhere. It was almost as if he was single-handedly handling all of Goan's responsibilities, as amusing and intriguing as it sounded. I felt infuriated finding him everywhere. If I was at a local coffee shop, I would see him. If I was shopping, I'd see him again. It was almost as if he was stalking me, but I never caught him staring at me. It was always I who did the staring. Perhaps that is why it came as a shock when I saw him again at a local bar. It was a Sunday night, and I could see tens of foreigners like me. Some of them even got to talking to me at some point. During one of those interactions, I saw Rehan conversing with another man. The other man was not Indian, and I could tell that much, but that mattered little when I noticed the other things about them. They were leaning in too close, even though the music was blasting through speakers and it gave people an excuse to come close. I could see theirs was sus. It was intentional, and perhaps that was why. It did not surprise me when I saw Rehan holding the man's hand and dragging him to the washroom. But it made no sense. I leaned in to scream to the person closest to me that I was going for a pee. He nodded and ordered another drink. I slammed my glass on the counter and followed Rehan and the other guy. The sight before me stopped me from taking further steps into the washroom. The two of them were engaged in a passionate lip lock. Rehan was seated on the counter, and it was clear what their intentions were. I was baffled. Was Rehan gay? I mean, that sight surely did indicate that. Most of all, was Pia dating a gay man? Before either of them could catch me looking, I stormed out of the bar and left for my hotel. I was irritated and upset. The most disturbing part was that I couldn't even tell why. 3 more days passed since our breakup, and Pia did not stop calling, once. Her messages were littered with sorry words and beautiful Hindi and Urdu poetry to describe the pain of an estranged lover. It pissed me off. She was using all her beauty to hide the ugly things she had done. I couldn't even begin to imagine how long she'd been at it, and to think that I wouldn't have found out about it if I hadn't planned for a surprise. Incredible indeed. On one of my trips around the city, I happened to stumble into Rehan again. This time he was alone as always. He was smoking this time, but he did not throw it away like he had done the last time. Strangely, instead of finding myself repulsed to be in his presence, I craved to form any sort of conversation with him. I told myself it was to understand what really went on between Pia and him. Surely he could tell me that much. As much as I didn't want to deal with the hurt and pain caused by that woman, I was well aware that I would have to deal with it to move on. Going back was not an option. I was not raised in an environment where anyone ever tolerated such behavior. I wasn't going to change that anytime soon. Not for a cheating partner. "This time you sought me out," Rehan said, and rolled a cigarette between his fingers. "Need some help? Someone to talk to?" He wriggled his brows. "How did you two meet?" I asked, and looked ahead at the open ocean in front of me. Goa's beaches were blessed with beauty, something that even California could not rival. Looking at it now made sense as to why I love visiting UT despite the black clouds overhead. It made for an amazing sight. "Who, Pia and me?" He shrugged. "I was desperate and she wanted a boyfriend. At least that was what she said when we started dating." "Oh," I replied, confused by his response. "Just like that?" He shrugged again. "I needed help and she was willing to offer me." He smoked a cigarette again and then repeated his previous confessions. "I understand." I took my camera in my hands. "Why were you desperate?" "It's none of your business." He threw a cigarette and stomped over it. "It is, sorta," I answered a little meanly. "You're the guy my girlfriend cheated on me with. I need to know." "You need to know why your woman cheated on you? Go and ask her." He shoved his hands in his pockets and stepped away from me, probably a sign that he was leaving. "What happened is mostly her mistake. She never told me about you." But my mind was traveling 100 miles a second. I could think of nothing but one thing. "I saw you kissing a man in a bar a couple of days ago, in the washroom. He was not Indian. I could tell that much," I said, and he stopped in his tracks. "That was the only way I could do it." "Is that why you were desperate? Needed a girlfriend to hide from parents, little bunny?" "Shut up," he hissed. He looked around, his face was now red. And I quite felt bad about how I was handling the situation. None of it was delicate and elegant. The two things I was known for in my town back home. "Stay away from me." "I know your name, man. I don't think that's possible." I looked at the ocean again. "Let's take a dip. I will let you go." Rion looked at me confused and unsettled. Our height difference probably made it worse for him. He was a lot shorter than I, and it probably played a huge part in how he understood the strange encounter between us. Even so, I could not see any shame in him. He could have been scared of his family discovering his affairs with men, sure, but he wasn't ashamed of them. 5 minutes later, we took a dip. If I were to be honest, despite spending half an hour in the cool water, I felt a little warmer about Rehan after that. An hour later, he guided me to the nearest coffee shop. It was a local store, and Rehan promised that they served well for the little price they asked for. Certainly $2 a coffee would not be too heavy for my pockets. He asked and raised an eyebrow at me. "No," I answered, "but I'm in the mood for some nice tea." "Well, tea it is then." Rehan did not speak much, probably because he was worried he would incite some strong negative emotions in me. So instead of commenting on what I had said and done previously, he commented on the weather. It was drizzling and he predicted it would rain soon. "It's going to get colder," he murmured. "Do you not like the cold?" I asked. "I am divided, honestly." He neatly placed his cup on the table. "Now that you've seen me naked, will you let me be?" "I haven't." I tried to deny, but he cut me off. "I saw you looking," he said. "I'm not assuming your sexuality, but you can be a little subtle about it." If it wasn't for my age and experience, I really would have blushed in embarrassment at such a remark. But I wasn't a teenager anymore. I was a man in his late 20s and in control of my emotions. Or at least I hoped so. I crossed my hands over the table and looked straight into his eyes. "I am bisexual, Rehan. I have dated men and women in all these years. My longest relationship was with Pia, and in those years we have slept together quite a lot of times. I was not looking at you, I lied, but appreciating your confidence to be confident in your birthday skin at the beach. He pursed his lips. I do not always do that. There was no one around. Except another man. Not me, but the guy in the restaurant who's probably the one waiting outside in the car. I nodded at the red BMW. Maybe you can learn to be a little subtle as I sipped my tea. I made sure not to look away from Rehan's bulging eyes. Rehan huffed out a laugh and leaned against his chair. He was blushing. His olive complexion glowed. In that strange moment, he looked almost as beautiful as Pia herself. I like you, he said. I didn't have anything to reply, so I kept my mouth shut. But I will need to leave. Now that you know, you will keep your mouth shut. I shrugged and did not make any promises. He got up from his side and stretched out a hand for a handshake. I grabbed his hand in mine and marveled at the size difference. I couldn't help it. It was almost natural. All right, I will leave then. Sure, I answered. He nodded and left. Through the window, I saw him running through the rain to meet the guy in the car. I saw them kissing before I pulled my eyes away from the scene. I couldn't help but feel weird as I played with my cup of tea. The same night, as I slept in the dark, I couldn't help but examine the hand that held Rehan's. I could see the shape of it in the little moonlight that slipped through the open curtains, and for some strange reason, I hoped I'd be able to touch him more. The thought that he was probably being touched by someone else at this very moment did not leave my mind. In the morning, I felt guilty about thinking that way. Things got a little tolerable for me after that day. As the second week of the breakup drew to a close, Pia stopped messaging or calling me. As I entered into the third week, it was almost as if she had gotten over it. It hurt to think that she might not have been into our relationship as much as I was. Could it be that I was too forthcoming? I couldn't help but ask myself that. The more I asked myself that, the more upset I felt about her and myself. I was never the one to feel self-doubt, but here I was. But something else was happening on the side as well. As the first month ended, and as strange as it sounded, things between Rehan and me started looking better. We often talk now, and even I had his number with me. When he was free, we strolled along the popular and unpopular sites around Goa. It was when we walked and explored the unpopular ones that I liked spending time with him the most. It was also only then that Rehan shared personal details about his life. As much as I hated to admit it, spending time with him made it easier for me to tolerate the absence and unfaithfulness of Pia, even though Rehan himself was one of the reasons why my relationship ended in the first place. Strangely, I did not fault him for that. I guess it helped that he explained his side of the story better. So you're saying, I began as we leaned against the safety handrails, you're gay. If that wasn't already obvious, he added and grinned, then why did you even date a girl? I couldn't help but think, my girl, Pia, was my girl after all. Why, of all people, only these two had to collide? It took a moment to answer. Have you ever dealt with homophobia? Well, I sighed. I was bi and not gay, and although things weren't very great for bi, it wasn't as bad as what happened with gay men in extreme situations, or even subtly. Even so, I had my fair share of dealings with idiocracy. I told him the same, and he nodded his head. He then asked if I had dealt with any of that within the family. I'll have to think about it, I answered. They never really had a problem with me being bi, I began some moments later, but they did not always like it when I brought my boyfriends at home. They never outright made a remark, but it was obvious they did not like it. Not with my parents, however. They've always been cool, regardless of whom I brought home. Well, Rehan said, and took a deep breath, let's just say it's not the same for me. He smiled at me and walked down the stairs. And that was all that he had said for the entire evening. I couldn't help but look at him in silence. Needless to say, I was fascinated by this man. Rehan called me at 1 in the night the same week and asked if I wanted to attend a late night party. He sounded excited despite the noise in the background, and even though I was sleepy as hell, I told him to message me the address. He said he would come and pick me up. Before I could tell him not to take such a burden, he had hung up. So around 1:15 he came to pick me up with another man. It was not someone I had seen before, so I knew Rehan had just picked up another man to mess up with. Rehan sounded like a playboy, but he wasn't so. He was just, as far as I knew, a lost soul. Being gay and being afraid never went well. The only way of keeping his family safe was to be every man's dirty little secret, and he did that well, much to my irritation and chagrin. For some unfathomable reason, I wanted to change that. We reached a little building near the beach and immediately got swallowed by a huge and excited crowd. I had never seen such liveliness before, And so it did not take me long to finish my first set of vodka. As the night drew to a close, my drinks count increased in number. By the time the DJ hit some sick beats, I was drunk to my bones. As it happened, I was bolder when drunk and out of my senses. So, the next morning, when I woke up with a massive headache, with a warm, naked body softly snoring next to me, I did not scream or feel upset. All I felt was confusion, because I sure as hell did not remember sleeping with Rehan of all people. Rehan ignored me for some time after that night. The morning after was awkward between us, even though we both had previously shown an interest in men. But our circumstances were different than most people, and it made it worse that it never felt like we could ever do so. Rehan wore his clothes and left the place in silence. I called him throughout the day, but he never picked up any of my calls. I guessed he was upset. About what? I couldn't tell. I hadn't left my room the whole day, and I was hungry as hell. I sighed, rubbed my face, and got dressed. I hoped on my way to a cafe or restaurant I would find him again. I didn't. This time it was hard to reach him. It was almost as if he had left the city. As ashamed as I was to admit this, I did a little stalking. If it were not for that, I wouldn't have found him 3 days later. When he saw me, he tried to escape a conversation. I held his wrist and dragged him to a more secluded place. We need to talk, I insisted when he tried to leave. No, we cannot, please, he said and stepped a little away. I dropped his hand but didn't let him leave. It wasn't my proudest moment, but I didn't want him to feel bad about sleeping with me. Sure, the situation between us was complicated as hell, but he liked men, and I did too. There was no shame in what we did, even though what we did was a drunken thing. My dad's friend saw me with you, Rehan began, his voice almost in a sob. Oh, I said. I didn't know how to react. I wasn't much aware of this situation with his family, which also meant I couldn't say what went downhill. When? He couldn't exactly say it was me, but he told my dad he suspected it was me. And I don't fucking know, alright? He added in a hiss. I was drunk out of my mind and I wasn't checking. And he found me. Dad was so angry. Oh God. I swallowed. I was drunk too, I told him. I couldn't have known either. I know, he whispered, and he leaned against the wall. Instead of looking at me, he closed his eyes. I want you to know something, Daniel. He licked his bottom lip. My family's not homophobic. They're all okay with this stuff. I mean, you have to be. Living in Goan and being homophobic is not good for business. But they don't want their son to be one of them, you know? That's homophobia, Rehan, I told him softly. But he did not seem to be listening. That's why I keep this about me a secret. I avoid being seen with men because I'm afraid they will not like it. He looked down. And I don't want that. So you're willing to live like this? I asked and pointed at him. Hiding? I have no other option, he shrugged. You have, I answered. I live off my dad's money, Daniel. I work as a tour guide because I know I don't have to worry about money. If he ever finds out, he's going to kick me out of the family. He will not do that, I told him, even though I had seen many people doing that even in my country. And it's not the end of the world. You can always start something of your own. Get another job. The world does not end there. He looked into my eyes and then... You don't understand, he said. He straightened his clothes, wiped some tears from his eyelashes, and moved away from me again. I'm sorry for not picking up your calls. I was worried about Dad finding out about it. I will message you later. We can go out or something. That's alright, I told him. Before you leave, I wanted to ask something. About that night? He asked. I don't regret it, Daniel, if that's what you're wondering about. I don't regret spending time with men, and I will never do so. I just don't want my family to know about it. And that answer should have been a warning. Unfortunately, I act as if I had done a PhD in ignoring red flags. 2 days after that meeting with Rehan, we met again and slept together. Rehan said he liked my touch, and there was really no way I could deny him after that. The thoughts of Pia had long escaped my mind. She had even blocked me on all SNS, as if everything was my mistake. She was definitely embarrassed and worried that I might expose her for her deeds. What I knew, however, was that she would do that to me. I knew that she would spread lies about our breakup between her group of friends. Strangely, though, I couldn't care less. I felt as if we were moving too fast. I felt as if I was moving too fast. Yet, I couldn't care less about that when I feared that there was a good chance this thing between Rehan and me would, and could, anytime soon. My mother was growing desperate to see me after my breakup. I hadn't updated her about my life here yet. I hadn't even told her that I was hooking up with an Indian guy called Rehan. That information was sure to blow her mind off, but I decided to keep it all to myself until I could not. As days passed into weeks, Rehan and I slept together more often. He stopped meeting men outside of our situationship. It seemed to work for a while. 2 months into my stay in the city, I even brought him on a couple of dates. We kissed at a few romantic locations around the world, and I had a good number of Polaroids to prove that. It seemed to go on so smoothly that I started believing that instead of a bride, I would take with me a groom. Until, of course, it stopped working. Somewhere in the 3rd month of my stay in the city and the 2nd month in my arrangement with Rehan, we got into an argument. I happened to say something mean and rubbish, and it ended whatever was going on between us. How did it actually go? One might wonder. As much as it shamed me to admit my fault, the truth was that I was the one to fuck up a potentially happy relationship. Something was going on with Rehan's family when I asked him one late night, when he was still awake in my arms. He informed me that his older brother was getting married. Then he said that although it was a happy occasion, it meant that his family would look at him next. Have you tried to tell him now? I suggested sleepily. He removed himself from my arms and sat up on the bed. I cannot do that. And why? I asked. I know it's scary, but you cannot live like this your whole life, Rehan. Someday you'll have to tell him. He simply shook his head. Rehan, I said softly, keeping silent will kill you. I will lose my family if I say anything. He got up and walked to the window. He was still naked, so I told him to wear something. He ignored my advice. And I will not lose them, no matter what. I don't have anyone else. I can be your family, I said. I don't know anything about you, he replied. Then we did not talk about it. The next time we did was a week later. It was the same cafe I'd seen him leaving with the guy in the BMW. It was again raining, and we decided to stay the night in my hotel room. But as soon as we stepped out, Rehan freaked out and dragged me into a dark hallway. I asked him what happened, and he replied that he had seen his dad. You have to tell him someday, I said. Shut up, will you? He hissed, his eyes more fearful than angry. I swallowed. I'm not here to play games, Rehan. We cannot play this hide and seek unless we either tell him or leave the city. I'm not planning to do either, he answered. I sighed. Irritation bubbled within me, and even though I knew I would regret it, I said it anyway. So you're planning to stay every man's one-night shame for the rest of your life? The moment those words were out of my mouth, I realized I messed it all up really badly. Something clicked in Rehan. He gave up checking on his dad and looked at me. For a moment, he did not say anything. Then, as simple as it sounded, he said, I'm glad to be yours as well, and left. I stayed standing there in shock at what I had said. By the time I realized I needed to make it all right, Rehan had long left. 10 minutes after that argument, he blocked my number and all my social media accounts. Virtually, he had decided to walk out of my life, and he had done so, just like that. Conclusion. I tried to find traces of Rehan in the city, but I couldn't. I spent weeks looking for him, but I could not find him anywhere. When I asked people around if they knew where he was, I received the answer that he had taken up one of his dad's branches in another city and was now handling that branch. After that, I did not hear anything from him. Soon, my mom started insisting I return to the USA. With nothing left to seek out in the cursed city, I decided to leave the country. I returned to mine, empty-handed and broken-hearted. The end. Could it have gone better between Rehan and Daniel in any way? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force and stay wholesome.